to Houston Real Estate Radio. I'm your host, Shannon Register, and I'm joined here in the studio today with Sheila Blake, and she is the Assistant Deputy Director, Code Administrator for the City of Houston. And I want to talk to her today about some of the code issues that I see consumers having. And when I say consumers, I mean both buyers and sellers. Some of the things that I see in the real estate world between consumers and between buyers and sellers. So welcome to the program, Sheila.
Thank you for having me.
You know, when buyers purchase a home, they have an option period to do an inspection on the home when it's a resale. And so one of the things that they do is they bring in their inspector to look at everything and see what's functioning, what's not. And sometimes during that process, they find things that are wrong with the house and they ask the seller to repair those, or they go back and renegotiate the price of the house during that option period. But one of the things, and you know, that seems very logical. Something's broken, you know, Mr. Seller, either fix it or take a little money off the house, right? But one of the things that happens quite often is that things come up on that inspection report that aren't wrong, but they do come up on the inspection report because maybe they're out of code. So, for example, one of the things that I see a lot of buyers and sellers working on in negotiations is the fact that their electrical panel is out of code. And so the inspector has to say it's out of code, but yet it's still working functional. You know, it's still very functional. It's working fine, and the seller's never had a problem with it. So you may have a buyer asking for all of these code upgrades for the electrical panel, and the seller's saying, you know, I've been living in this house 10 years. I've never had an electrical problem, never had an issue. It was compliant and up to code when I bought the house. Now I'm trying to sell it and I'm running into all these issues. Mm-hmm. So I want to hear, because you enforce codes and you see all the code updates that go on, talk to us a little bit about that and your point of view and how you would respond to a seller and buyer in that situation to kind of let them see what's happening on both sides of that situation.
Well, I think there's two things at play here. One is that there are two different missions between what the truck inspector is looking for on behalf of the buyer. They're really looking at saving that buyer, you know, problems and money down the road, which may or may not have to do with code. And the second issue is grandfathering under the codes. You know, something that's built 40, 50, 80 years ago under a code, or even 10 or 5 years ago, is perfectly fine. We call that grandfather. It's not a legal term, but they use it a lot related to the legality of adopted codes. And all the codes have a clause in them that say existing buildings are legally allowed to continue as long as they stay safe. And so as long as it hasn't been declared a dangerous building in any way, which you would know about that through your due diligence, it's perfectly fine. That building is suitable.
I think one of the issues that throws buyers, especially first-time home buyers who've never seen these inspection reports that the TREC inspectors do, is that the TREC inspector has to choose that either the house has a deficiency or it's not deficient. And if it's not up to code, they put that it's deficient. And when you're buying a house and spending, you know, $150,000 to $300,000 on a house, you're looking at it going, okay, there's a deficiency. We need to get that fixed. When really it's not a deficiency, but that's how they have to put it on that inspection report.
Well, you know, I think that's important to make a distinction. Codes are updated every 3 years. So any building over 3 years old technically may not meet the current code, especially the example you gave for electrical. You know, it's just a few years ago we started adding the arc fault protection in the bedrooms.
That's a big one. We hear about it all the time.
Get called out for any building that was built prior to that date.
Right.
That building didn't suddenly become unsafe just because we added a new requirement, which was at a higher level of safety, but not necessarily a problem. So I think it's important to understand that distinction about what's grandfathered and what's not grandfathered, and that codes change every few years.
So every 3 years the codes are updated. Is there any way for consumers to go on and see what the codes are online or somewhere? Is there any way for them to know what the codes are?
Well, sure there is. We have to keep in mind that the codes we adopt in Houston are all nationally promulgated publications.
Okay.
And they're not law until they're adopted. So it's just like buying a blue book, right? You buy the publication, and then there's a whole hearing process. It's very formal for updating. They hold these hearings every year, and things are proposed and added and taken out. But the actual base code is available from technical bookstores, from the publishers themselves, and we buy them. And then we amend them locally. And we work with our Construction Industry Council and our local people to amend them through a process that allows them to make proposals and bring forth things that are local conditions. So it's a different process, but it's not just one single book that you can go down and buy at the city building department.
Now, let's talk about the ARC fault, because that is a huge one. When a buyer sees that this house doesn't have ARC fault protection because it's over 3 years old, so they now want to add that, what would you say to them as far as safety goes? Is that a safety issue for the house?
Yeah, it's sort of like carbon monoxide detectors. For years and years and years, people weren't required to put those in, but they did because they wanted that added level of protection. It's the same thing with an arc fault. There have been a few occasional problems, and that's why they were put in the codes.
Okay.
So it's just adding that extra thing. You know, if you want to buy a ladder to hang out of your second-story window in case of a fire escape, you know, that's not required by code, but you go to the extra level.
Just more security in the home ownership.
Right.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the difference between a new home code enforcement inspection, which is what you guys do, versus a TREC inspector who would come in once the house is completely built and inspect it. And I will say a TREC inspector can go in through the whole phase of building and recheck. But usually most home buyers get an inspector to go in after the house is completely built. To do that inspection. But let's talk about the distinction between the code enforcement inspections during the new construction build and then the TREC inspector who would come in afterwards.
And that gets at the second item I brought up about the different missions. Code is a minimum standard for a building, you know, related to safety, durability, how things function, you know, the length of the pipe and that sort of thing. Whereas the TREC inspector, again, is looking beyond that. And one example I can give you that's real simple is garage doors. You know, we don't go around checking whether the rails were straight and the garage door operates properly. That's operational. But the TREC inspector will catch that, you know, because they want to make sure that that homeowner isn't going to have to deal with a problem later on if something went wrong with that garage door rail, for example.
I have a lot of new buyers, or not new buyers, but new construction buyers who are purchasing a new build. And, you know, they say the house was just built. It looks beautiful. It looks perfect. I don't know that I want to spend $500 for an inspection. Everything's working. What would you say to them? Would you recommend that they get an inspection?
I think I would. I think a relative of mine, you know, I would say go ahead and get the real estate inspection done anyway, because they are looking for the operations of everything. You know, I mentioned in a previous discussion about how during the foundation the code inspector comes in and looks at the rebar. But then we leave and they place the concrete on that foundation. And if some of that rebar started poking through somewhere and they cover it with dirt, we may not know about it, but the TREC inspector may catch it when he asks them to remove the dirt down lower from the foundation, for example.
Do you think on a new home construction, if a TREC inspector finds some things that are off or wrong with the house, that new home builder should fix those items? Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
If it's a true deficiency as opposed to, you know, just not meeting the most recent codes.
Right. Yeah, because some houses are built, a new construction house could be built in, let's say, 2013, then it sells in February of 2014. There could be a code. I mean, there's a potential for a code change.
Well, we just had one that's going to go in effect next month.
Right.
On the energy code side.
Yeah. So there could definitely be. And those houses that are going up right now will be grandfathered in, right?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah,
so they
it's the
won't
date
have
of
to
application
comply.
with the plans.
Okay. And plans could be approved long before the actual build happens, right?
Exactly.
Okay, very good. Lots of great information. You know, I always recommend, as realtors, we always recommend every buyer, whether it's new construction or a resale home, that they always get a home inspection through a TREC inspector. And then if there's issues found there, you can always take it to the next level and have, you know, an HVAC professional or a plumber or someone come in and do a next level inspection. But that basic inspection, I think, is very important. All right. Well, thank you so much for the information. We appreciate you coming on. Lots of good information for consumers to know about because homes are constantly changing. We're finding better and better ways to build homes to make them more energy efficient, more cost effective, and certainly safer and better quality as well. So good news for the home building industry. All right. We'll be back right here on Houston Real Estate Radio in just a minute, right after a word from our sponsors. Thanks for tuning in to Houston Real Estate Radio.